I'm Tiffany Scott, 34 years old, and I'll never forget the night my family tore me apart at our dinner table. It was a humid evening in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the kind where tension hangs thicker than the air. I sat across from my parents and my older brother, their faces lit by the glow of a chandelier as they ripped into me. Still renting Tiffany, my mother sneered, her voice sharp enough to cut. What a failure. My father nodded, his eyes cold, while my brother smirked, leaning back like he owned the world. The relatives around the table chuckled, their laughter slicing through me. I'd spent years propping them up, pouring money into their dreams, swallowing their betrayals, but that night they called me worthless. Each word burned a reminder of every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd given, every lie I'd let slide. I could have screamed, could have flipped that table and let the plates crash. Instead, I forced a smile, tight and cold, and walked out, their mocking voices echoing behind me. They thought they'd broken me, thought I'd stay silent. They had no idea what I was planning. Have you ever been hurt by your own family? Share your experience in the comments. I'm reading every single one. That night, I stumbled into my rented apartment in Baton Rouge, the door slamming behind me. My hands shook as I dropped my keys on the counter, the sting of my family's words still raw. I sank onto the couch, staring at the ceiling, their voices replaying in my head. Failure. That's what they called me. I closed my eyes and the memories flooded back, years of sacrifices I'd buried to keep the peace. I was 24 when I paid $30,000 for my brother's college tuition. He wanted to be a big-shot real estate investor, and I believed in him. I drained my savings, worked extra hours as a freelance accountant, all so he could chase his dreams. He graduated, threw a party, and never once thanked me. Instead, he acted like it was his right, like I owed him. My parents clapped him on the back proud while I stood in the shadows, invisible. Then there was the time my mom begged for a loan, $20,000 to renovate their house. The kitchen needed updating, she said, or they'd lose face in the neighborhood. I didn't hesitate, wiring the money from my account, thinking it was temporary. They never paid me back. Not a cent. My dad just shrugged, said they were tight on cash, and changed the subject. I let it go, told myself family comes first. The worst cut came later. I'd been saving for a down payment on a house, scraping together every dollar. One day, I checked my account, $10,000 gone. My brother had access from years ago when we shared a joint savings for emergencies. He took it, no explanation, no apology. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, said I was too uptight about money. My parents knew, but they looked the other way, told me to drop it for the sake of family harmony. I swallowed my anger, locked it deep, but it festered. Sitting there on my couch, those betrayals piled up, each one a brick in a wall of resentment. I'd given them everything, my money, my trust, my future, and they'd thrown it back in my face. They called me a failure, mocked my rented apartment while they lived in a house I'd helped pay for. The unfairness burned a fire I couldn't douse. I grabbed my phone, hand still trembling, and dialed David Carter, my boyfriend. He picked up on the first ring. David, they did it again, I said, my voice cracking. They called me a failure right in front of everyone. I'm done. I poured out the story, the dinner, the sneers, the laughter. He listened, quiet at first, letting me vent. When I finished, his voice was steady, calm, like a lifeline. Tiffany, you're not the failure here, he said. They're the ones leaning on you. Have you ever checked their finances? People who act that smug are usually hiding something. I froze, the idea hitting me like a spark. David was right. My parents and brother always flaunted their lifestyle. But there were cracks. The fancy cars, the renovated house, my brother's endless investment opportunities. What if they weren't as secure as they seemed? What if their perfect world was built on sand? My mind raced, piecing together years of clues, late payments, vague excuses, my brother's failed real estate deals. David, can you help me dig into this? I asked, my voice sharper now, focused. He agreed, promising to pull some financial software he used at work to track down public records. I hung up a plan forming in the dark of my apartment. They thought they could humiliate me and walk away. They were wrong. I wasn't just going to fight back, I was going to dismantle their world piece by piece. A few days later, I sat across from Linda Fowler, my best friend, at a small coffee shop in Baton Rouge. The smell of fresh espresso filled the air, but my focus was razor sharp. Linda, a real estate agent with a knack for digging up dirt, had agreed to meet me after I texted her about my family's betrayal. I needed answers, hard evidence of what David suspected. Were my parents and brother hiding financial cracks behind their smug facades? I leaned forward, my coffee untouched, and got straight to the point. Linda, I need you to check on my parents' house, I said, keeping my voice low. David thinks they're in over their heads. Something's off. I can feel it. Linda raised an eyebrow, flipping open her laptop. You sure about this, Tiffany? Digging into family finances can get messy. I nodded, my jaw tight. I wasn't backing down. She typed quickly, pulling up property records, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the screen. After a few minutes, she let out a low whistle. Tiffany, you're not gonna believe this, she said, turning the laptop toward me. Your parents took out a second mortgage on their house 2 years ago. They owe $150,000 and they're behind on payments. It's tied to some real estate deal your brother pitched them. I felt my stomach twist. My brother's big dreams, always so shiny, always so empty. What kind of deal? I pressed, leaning closer. Linda scrolled through more records, her fingers moving fast. Tucker convinced them to invest in a strip mall project, she said. He was supposed to flip it for a profit, but the deal tanked. The bank's circling, now ready to foreclose if they miss another payment. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. That house is all they've got, Tiffany. If they lose it, they're done. My mind raced, piecing it together. My parents had bet their home on my brother's latest scheme, the same brother who'd taken my money without a second thought. They'd mocked me for renting while their world was crumbling, propped up by my sacrifices. The irony hit hard, but it wasn't enough to just know they were failing. I wanted control. I wanted them to feel what I felt, humiliated, powerless. Linda, can I buy their house without them knowing? I asked, my voice steady now, a plan taking shape. She leaned back, crossing her arms, a small smile tugging at her lips. It's tricky but doable, she said. The bank's desperate to offload the loan. You could form a company, make an offer through a third party. They'd never know it was you until the deal's done. She tapped her pen against the table, thinking. You'd need serious cash, though. The house is valued at $4 million, but with the debt, you could get it for less if you move fast. I nodded, my heart pounding. I had $750,000 saved, years of scraping by skipping vacations, working late nights. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was a start. Linda promised to connect me with a contact who could pull strings at the bank. She also gave me a name, John Reed, a lawyer, who could set up a company to keep my identity hidden. I thanked her, my mind already spinning with possibilities. Back at my apartment, I pulled out my laptop and started crunching numbers. The house was the key, their pride, their status, their everything. If I owned it, I'd hold the strings. I could make them pay not just with money, but with the weight of their own arrogance. I pictured my mom's face, so quick to call me a failure when she realized I'd flipped the script. My brother's smirk gone. My dad's cold silence broken. I called David that night, filling him in. It's perfect, he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. You take their house, you take their power. They'll never see it coming. He promised to help me run the numbers, make sure every step was airtight. I hung up, my resolve hardening. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about taking back what they'd stolen from me. The next morning, I walked into John Reed's law office in downtown Baton Rouge, my steps firm, my mind set. John Reed, a sharp-eyed lawyer with a reputation for getting things done, greeted me with a handshake. Linda had vouched for him, said he could make my plan airtight. I sat across from his polished desk laying out my goal: buy my parents' house without them knowing it was me. I wanted their world in my hands, and I wasn't leaving anything to chance. John, I need a company to shield my name. I said, my voice steady. Something that lets me buy their house through the bank fast. He nodded, scribbling notes, his brow furrowed. It's possible, he said, but it'll take precision. We'll form Summit Properties, a limited liability company. You'll be the silent owner. The bank won't care who's behind it as long as the money's good. I told him about my $750,000 in savings, every penny I'd clawed together over years of late nights and skipped dreams. It was my weapon now. John leaned forward, outlining the process. We'll file the paperwork today. Summit Properties will be active by next week. You'll need more capital for a $4 million house, though. Got anyone in mind? I nodded, thinking of Ellen Brooks, a real estate investor Linda had mentioned. John promised to draft the contracts to keep my identity buried. I left his office, a spark of control igniting inside me. That afternoon, I called Ellen Brooks. She was a no-nonsense woman, 50, with a track record of snapping up distressed properties. Ellen, I'm looking to buy a house in Baton Rouge, I said, keeping it vague. $4 million bank-owned, and I need a partner to cover the gap. I mentioned my $750,000 and the house's debt, $150,000 in missed mortgage payments. Ellen didn't hesitate. Sounds like a steal if we move quick, she said. I can bring $2 million to the table, maybe more. Get me the details and I'll talk to the bank. Her confidence fueled mine. I sent her the property records Linda had pulled, and she agreed to meet me in a few days to finalize the offer. While the paperwork churned, I started watching my family. I drove by their house one evening, parking across the street, hidden in the shadows of a quiet Baton Rouge suburb. Their sprawling two-story home glowed with lights, the driveway packed with my brother's new SUV and my parents' gleaming sedan. Through the window, I saw my mom rearranging flowers for a dinner party, my dad pouring wine, my brother laughing with guests. They were living like kings, throwing lavish gatherings, oblivious to the debt piling up. My brother strutted around, tossing back drinks, acting untouchable. It made my blood boil. They mocked me for renting while their house of cards teetered. I kept tabs over the next week, noticing delivery trucks dropping off new furniture, my mom flaunting a designer handbag at the grocery store. My brother posted online about his next big deal, all bravado, no substance. They were clueless, spending money they didn't have, betting on a future they couldn't secure. Each sighting hardened my resolve. They thought they were above me, but I was closing in. Back at my apartment, I met David to go over the numbers. He pulled up financial models on his laptop, mapping out the purchase. With your savings and Ellen's investment, you're set, he said, his eyes gleaming. The bank's desperate, they'll take the offer to clear the debt. We calculated the timeline. Summit Properties would be ready in days, the bank would review our bid, and the house could be mine in 2 weeks. David grinned, squeezing my hand. You're rewriting their story, Tiffany. I nodded, picturing the moment I'd hold the deed. They'd mocked my life, my choices, but soon they'd face the consequences. My plan was moving, unstoppable now. A week later, I sat in my Baton Rouge apartment staring at the confirmation email from John Reed. Summit Properties now owned my parents' house, the ink barely dry on the deed. I'd crafted a letter through the company, cold and formal, informing my parents their rent was jumping from $2,000 to $6,000 a month, effective immediately. The bank had handed over the keys after our offer cleared, and I was ready to tighten the screws. I sent the letter, picturing their faces when it hit their mailbox. This was the first strike, and it felt sharp, precise. 2 days later, my doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. I opened the door to find my parents, William Scott and Pamela Scott, and my brother, Tucker Scott, standing there, their faces a mix of fury and disbelief. My dad's jaw was tight, his eyes boring into me. My mom clutched the letter, her knuckles white. Tucker stood behind them, arms crossed, glaring like I'd stolen something from him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tiffany, what the hell is this? My dad demanded, waving the letter. $6,000 a month. You're behind this, aren't you? His voice shook with anger, but I caught a flicker of fear in his eyes. They weren't used to being cornered. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my face neutral. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my tone calm, deliberate. Summit Properties owns your house now. They set the rent. That's business. I watched their reactions, savoring the way their confidence cracked. Business. Tucker snapped, stepping forward. Don't play dumb, Tiffany. This has your name all over it. You're trying to screw us. His voice was loud, but I saw his hands tremble, betraying his bravado. He wasn't used to being challenged, not by me. I shrugged, keeping my cards close. I'm just a renter, Tucker. Maybe you should talk to the company? Sounds like they're calling the shots now. I let the words hang sharp and cold, enjoying the way they landed. My dad's face reddened, his fists clenching. Pamela stepped in, her voice softer, but no less cutting. Tiffany, how could you do this to us? We're your family. If this is some kind of revenge, it's cruel. Her eyes searched mine like she expected me to back down to play the obedient daughter. Then she turned to Tucker, her tone shifting to defense. Your brother's been working hard to fix things. He doesn't deserve this. I felt a pang in my chest, sharp and raw. Even now, after everything she was shielding him, the same son who'd taken my money, who'd laughed in my face. Fix things, I said, my voice, low, steady. Like how he fixed his strip mall deal, or how he fixed my bank account when he took $10,000. I locked eyes with Tucker, watching him flinch. That's enough. Pamela snapped, her face flushing. Tucker made mistakes, but he's trying. You don't get to punish us for it. Her words stung, a reminder of every time she'd chosen him over me, every time she'd dismissed my sacrifices. My dad stayed silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding the truth. I straightened, my resolve hardening. I'm not punishing anyone, I said, my voice like steel. Summit Properties raised your rent. If you can't pay, that's on you. Maybe you should have thought twice before calling me a failure. I let the memory of that dinner linger, unspoken but heavy. They froze, the weight of it sinking in. Tucker broke the silence, his voice venomous. You're gonna regret this, Tiffany. We'll figure out who's behind this company, and you'll be sorry. He stormed out, my parents trailing behind, Pamela throwing me a final wounded look. I shut the door, my heart pounding, a mix of triumph and ache. Their accusations meant they suspected me, but they had no proof. I'd kept my tracks covered, just as John had promised. The rift was real now, carved deep. Pamela's defense of Tucker was the final straw, proof they'd never see me as anything but the scapegoat. I wasn't their punching bag anymore. A week later, I stood at the front door of my parents' house in Baton Rouge, the deed to their home burning a hole in my bag. My heart pounded, not from nerves, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I'd spent years swallowing their insults, their betrayals, but today I held the power. I rang the bell, my posture straight, my face a mask of calm. William Scott. My dad opened the door, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion. Behind him, Pamela Scott, my mom, and my brother, Tucker Scott, appeared, their eyes narrowing as I stepped inside. Tiffany, what's this about? William asked, his voice gruff, arms crossed. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the living room where the same chandelier from that humiliating dinner glowed above. I set my bag down, pulling out the deed and a copy of the rent notice. Their stares followed every move. I'm here to clear things up, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tension. Summit Properties owns this house, and I own Summit Properties. I held up the deed, letting the words sink in. Pamela gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tucker's face twisted, a mix of shock and rage. William's jaw dropped, his eyes darting to the paper in my hand. You're lying, Tucker spat, stepping closer. There's no way you pulled this off. You're a renter, Tiffany. A nobody. His voice dripped with the same contempt from that dinner, but it didn't faze me now. I was in control. Check the deed, I said, tossing it onto the coffee table. It's real. I bought this house and you're my tenants now. Rent $6,000 a month. Pay it or you're out. I locked eyes with each of them, letting the reality hit. Pamela's face paled, her hands trembling. William gripped the back of a chair, silent, his confidence crumbling. Pamela found her voice shaky but defiant. Tiffany, this is our home. You can't just take it and throw us out. We're your family. Her plea was desperate, but it rang hollow. I'd heard that line before every time they needed my money, my silence. Family. I said, my tone sharp. Let's talk about family, Pamela. Let's talk about Tucker. I turned to him, my gaze unflinching. You took $10,000 from my savings. You thought I'd let it slide like always. Not this time. Tucker's eyes widened, his bravado cracking. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. I have the bank records. You accessed my account, took my money, and laughed it off. You're a thief, Tucker, and I'm done covering for you. William finally spoke, his voice, low, strained. That's enough, Tiffany. You've made your point. But this is too far. He gestured to the deed, his hand shaking. I didn't budge. Too far, I said, stepping closer. You called me a failure in front of everyone. You took my money, my trust, and gave me nothing but scorn. Now you're in my house, and you'll play by my rules. I pointed to the rent notice. $6,000 or you leave. That's the deal. Tucker exploded, his face red. You think you can scare us? I'll sue you, Tiffany. I'll drag this to court and you'll lose everything. His voice cracked, betraying his panic. I smiled, calm and cold, knowing he had nothing. Linda had confirmed their accounts were dry, his failed deals. Their debts left them with no leverage. A lawsuit would bury them faster than me. Go ahead, Tucker. I said, my voice like ice. Try it. You can't afford a lawyer, and I've got the law on my side. This house is mine legally. You're tenants, and you're failing. I let the word failing linger, a mirror to their cruelty. Pamela flinched, tears in her eyes, but I felt no pity. They'd built this moment, not me. Pamela reached for my arm, her voice breaking. Tiffany, please. We can work this out. Don't do this. I pulled away, my heart hard. Her loyalty to Tucker even now was the final nail. I'd given them everything, and they'd given me nothing. You have 30 days, I said, turning to leave. Pay or pack. I walked out, their stunned silence trailing behind me. I'd flipped their world upside down, and it felt right. The next day, I sat in my Baton Rouge apartment, the weight of my victory settling in. My parents, William Scott and Pamela Scott, and my brother, Tucker Scott, had 30 days to pay $6,000 in rent or leave the house I now owned. I knew they couldn't afford it. Linda's research had shown their accounts were bleeding, drained by Tucker's failed schemes and their reckless spending. I waited, watching the deadline approach, my phone silent. No calls, no apologies, just the quiet hum of their inevitable fall. 3 weeks later, I drove by their house, or rather, my house. The once pristine lawn was overgrown, the windows dark. A moving truck sat in the driveway, workers hauling out furniture that screamed of their old extravagance, a leather sofa, a mahogany dining table, my mom's cherished crystal lamps. I parked across the street, watching as Pamela carried a box, her face drawn, her designer handbag replaced by a worn tote. William followed, his shoulders slumped, no trace of the man who'd called me a failure. Tucker, usually so cocky, loaded boxes with a scowl, his tailored suit swapped for jeans and a faded shirt. They were leaving just as I'd demanded. I learned later they'd moved to a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, a far cry from their sprawling suburban home. The kind of place with thin walls, flickering lights, and neighbors who didn't care about their former status. Linda, still plugged into the local gossip, told me the neighbors had stopped inviting them to parties. Their social circle, once so tight, had unraveled. Whispers spread about their debts, their eviction, their fall from grace. The Scott family, once a pillar of the community, was now a cautionary tale. Tucker, I heard, had taken a job as a car salesman at a used lot off the highway. The irony wasn't lost on me. My brother, who'd dreamed of flipping million-dollar properties, was now peddling rusting sedans to make ends meet. I saw him once from a distance wearing a cheap polo with the dealership's logo, his smile forced as he waved at a customer. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow look that matched his empty promises. I didn't feel pity, only a cold satisfaction. He'd taken my money, my trust, and now he was paying the price. My parents' pride had crumbled too. William, who'd always held his head high, avoided eye contact at the grocery store, his cart filled with generic brands instead of the gourmet imports he once bragged about. Pamela, who'd clung to her image as the perfect hostess, stopped posting on social media. Her last update months ago was a photo from one of their lavish parties, now a mocking reminder of what they'd lost. Their world built on my sacrifices had collapsed under the weight of their own arrogance. I made my choice. Then I was done with them. I blocked their numbers, deleted their emails, and let the silence grow. They'd had their chance to make things right, to see me as more than a punching bag, but they'd chosen Tucker, chosen their pride every time. I wasn't their daughter anymore, not in any way that mattered. The house, now mine, stood empty, a monument to their mistakes. I was already planning to sell it to turn their last shred of status into cash for my future. That future was taking shape with David. One evening, as we sat on my couch, he took my hand, his eyes warm. "Tiffany, you did what you had to," he said, his voice steady. "Now it's time to move forward. With me." He pulled out a small velvet box, a simple diamond ring glinting inside. My heart, so long hardened by anger, softened. I said yes, the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a quiet hope. We started planning our wedding, a small ceremony with only those who mattered. Linda, a few close friends. No family. I walked through my apartment, no longer just a renter's space, but a home I'd built on my terms. The scars of their betrayal lingered, but they no longer defined me. I'd taken back my power, my life, and I was ready for what came next. A month later, I stood in a small garden in Baton Rouge, my white dress catching the soft April light. David Carter, my soon-to-be husband, smiled at me from the altar, his steady presence grounding me. Our wedding was simple, just Linda, a handful of friends, and a justice of the peace under a canopy of oak trees. No family, no past, only the people who'd stood by me. As I walked down the aisle, my heart was light, free of the weight of betrayal. I said my vows, promising David a life built on trust, not sacrifice. When we kissed, the small crowd cheered, and for the first time in years, I felt whole. The house I'd taken from my parents sold for $4 million, just as Linda had predicted. The profit was more than I'd ever dreamed of, holding $3 million after settling with Ellen Brooks. I didn't keep it all for myself. Instead, I founded Empower Future, a fund to help people like me, those dismissed, undervalued, or betrayed by the ones closest to them. The first grant went to a young woman in Baton Rouge, a single mother who'd been mocked by her family for pursuing a nursing degree. I met her at a local coffee shop, handing over a check for $10,000 to cover her tuition. Her tears, her gratitude, mirrored the relief I'd felt when I broke free. Empower Future was my way of turning pain into purpose, of ensuring others could reclaim their worth. One morning, as I sorted through mail at my new home with David, I found an envelope from William and Pamela Scott. The handwriting was my mom's, neat but shaky, with Tiffany scrawled across the front. I held it, my fingers tracing the edges, knowing it was an apology. They'd lost everything, their home, their status, their pride, and now they wanted forgiveness. I thought of their faces that night at dinner, their cruel words, Pamela's blind defense of Tucker. I thought of the years I'd given them, the money they'd taken, the trust they'd shattered. Without opening it, I dropped the letter into the trash. Some wounds don't heal with words, and I wasn't obligated to absolve them. They were my parents, but family doesn't get a free pass to hurt you. David noticed his hand resting on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, smiling faintly. "Better than okay," I said. He didn't push, didn't need to. He understood what I'd fought for, what I'd won. We were building a life together, one where loyalty wasn't a bargaining chip. Looking back, I saw the lesson carved into every step of this journey. Family isn't a shield for cruelty. It's a bond that demands respect, not blind devotion. My parents and Tucker thought they could take from me without consequence, that I'd always bend. But I learned that justice doesn't come from waiting for others to change. It comes from standing tall, from valuing yourself enough to demand what's right. I'd spent years believing love meant sacrifice, that family meant enduring pain. I was wrong. Love means boundaries, and family means mutual respect. When they crossed those lines, I drew my own. Empower Future grew its grants, reaching more people across Baton Rouge: students, single parents, anyone who'd been told they weren't enough. Each story I heard reminded me of my own, but also of my strength. I wasn't the failure they'd labeled me. I was the one who'd turned their house of cards into a foundation for others. My parents' letters stayed unopened, their voices silent in my life. I didn't need their approval anymore. As I stood on my balcony one evening, David beside me, I looked out at the city I'd made my own. Baton Rouge hummed with possibility, a place where I'd found my voice, my power. I'd fought for justice, not just for me, but for everyone who'd been underestimated. The lesson was clear: self-respect is the root of justice, and no one, not even family, has the right to strip it away.